just had a quick question.
Yes, yes.
So my presentation covers a good chunk of the agenda. Is there a part you just want me to focus on? Just the overview of what happened?
Yes, well, the only thing, Rhonda McCoy will go over what's happening, what is actually happening, an update on what's happening at the county level,
Okay.
aside from your piece, and kind of how the Annapolis Police Department and how the city of Annapolis is looking at actualizing what happens at that level and the upcoming, conversations and meetings around that. Okay, so you're fine, Annette, with whatever you want to cover in reference to your PowerPoint and the pieces that you have on there. So
I look at the emails, but I cannot find the agenda.
Okay, so it should be attached to not the one that I sent today. It might not be on that one, but it should be on the one. It is definitely on the original announcement that I sent for the meeting.
Will, do you have a date for your initial announcement? I can cruise through my email. I don't think I printed that agenda, and I can't find it on the current one too. But if I have a date, I can quickly, scroll through and find it.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm gonna go in my email and find it.
January 11th, Will.
Thank you. So
January 11th. Okay.
Yep, there'll be an attachment at the very bottom of the email, and that contains the
Thank
agenda.
you.
All right. So today, are we okay, Madeline?
Yes, you are streaming.
Okay, so this is our Civilian Review Board Advisory Panel meeting for 2022, January 2022, and today's date is the 19th. What we were tasked with doing was creating some framework for a Civilian Review Board, essentially police accountability, police oversight in the city of Annapolis. This is our advisory panel. We do have guests that are not members of the panel, but they are going to help us frame and inform where we are now and some of the work that's ahead in terms of police accountability in Anne Arundel County. So the first thing on our agenda is welcome and introduction. So I'll begin with myself since I'm running my mouth already. My name is William Rowell. I'm representing the mayor's office, by proxy the city of Annapolis. And I was also tasked with creating a body that would, of course, begin discussions around the formation of a Civilian Review Board. So I'm William, and we can, I don't know if our screens are all the same, but if we could go to the next person next to me, which I believe is Tatiana.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tatiana Klein.
Tatiana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Mm-hmm. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Tatiana?
Can you hear me?
Tatiana, I can hear you.
I hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
And
good.
who are you representing? You all? Yes. Yes, we
Well,
can hear
I'm
you.
right now with the Marshall Learning Center.
So when you introduce yourself, can you all also?
Will, your transmission is being interrupted and breaking up and it's lagging a little bit, if you can hear me.
Yeah, and also you don't see this. I think we all see the screen differently. So your best bet is going to be to call out.
Okay.
Who should speak next?
I'm really sorry about this, you all. Can you?
Okay.
Turn off your video, and then we'll move you over here.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to try to correct.
What you got in that glass, Chuck?
Okay, does that make a difference at all?
Sounds
does,
good.
yeah.
Okay, that's better. Okay, good. I'm sorry about that. My apologies. So next up is on my screen is Judy Budensick.
Hello, I'm Judy Budensick. I have a marketing agency here in Annapolis, the Francis Marketing Group, and I suffer from chronic volunteerism. So some of the things that you might find me doing, I'm the vice chair of the Annapolis Police Foundation. I am on the board of directors of the Police Scholarship Fund, and I'm on Chief Jackson's advisory board. So I'm thrilled to be here and find a great solution because we live in a great town and we don't have the problems everybody else does. So we're rock stars.
All right, Rev Morris.
Who?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rev Margaret Morris. Just like most of you, I overlap into a number of organizations, but I'm here on this panel representing the NAACP of Anne Arundel County under the leadership of President Jackie also.
Thank you. Jesse Rodellis.
Good afternoon, everyone. Jesse Rodales, the first Latino Olympic artist to represent the United States. And I'm also the executive director for the OIC of Anne Arundel County. I'm on the board for the Action Agency in Charting Careers. Glad to be here.
All right. Can you tell us what OIC is?
Yes. OIC is a nonprofit organization, and we have been helping the Anne Arundel community for over 44 years. We specialize in reentry services as well as GED classes in Spanish and English, also ESL classes and basic IT computer classes.
All right. Thank you. Carol Brown.
Oh. Hang on a second. Hello, everybody. I am so thrilled to be part of this board. I just can't tell you how excited I am for so many reasons, but I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for over 40 years. I'm licensed in 5 states, New York, Texas, Colorado, Connecticut, and Maryland. I served an assistant U.S. attorney with the Justice Department, and I was also an assistant district attorney in New York City. And right now I practice in family, which gets me into a little bit of protective order, peace orders. And so we're always looking at our interactions between the community and our law enforcement. And, like I said, I'm thrilled to be here. And I look forward to everything and anything this committee is going to undertake. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Randy Williams. I think Randy's off screen. I'll loop back around to Randy. Annette. Oh, I'm sorry. Randy. Can you introduce yourself? I think you're muted.
Yeah, Randy Williams. I don't know exactly why Will wanted me to be here. I'm the executive manager at Chuck E. Cheese. I don't know. Ring. All right, no. Randy Williams.
You'll have to know he's joking, right?
Well, it's like, well, then why didn't you send us all food? I mean, God.
So it's Randy Williams. I'm a retired Baltimore County Police Sergeant. I do a lot of advocacy work with, a bunch of affiliates, ACLU, NAACP, CAST, Connect the Dots. Whoever need my services, I'm there for them. That's all that.
Thank you. All right. Annette.
I was just thinking this is a real inclusive board. Hi, everyone. My name is Annette Emmanuel, and I'm the current interim public policy director at the ACLU of Maryland, and also a member of the Maryland Coalition for Just Police Accountability that was working on this last session, and I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight.
Thank you so much. Lydia.
Hey everybody, my name is Lydia Walter Rodriguez. I am the region director with GASA here in Central Maryland. CASA is the largest member-led organization that is serving, advocating for immigrant rights.
Thank you. Leanna?
Hi, afternoon. I'm Leanna. I'm the research and policy analyst for CASA in Central Maryland.
Thank you. James Spearman.
Evening, everybody. My name is James Spearman. Most call me Jimmy. Retired sergeant with Napa City Police Department. I did 33 years. Currently a member of the caucus and the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you so much. Chuck Harlan. Chuck Harlan.
Thanks, Will. Chuck Hurley, member of the Annapolis Human Relations Commission, and an old Quaker who thinks this is the right thing to do.
All right, that'll work. Frank Larkin.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Will, thanks for asking me to be part of this. I come from about 40 years of public service, 35 in law enforcement, working from a beat cop up in the Philadelphia area all the way up through homicide into the federal sector, 22 years with the Secret Service. And then also I've had contact with fire EMS as a 40-year paramedic, and recently came off Capitol Hill as the U.S. Senate Sergeant at Arms, where the U.S. Capitol Police Department reported to me. It was a 2,200 person department, and all the entertainment that went with that. So again, look forward to working with this group. And again, it's all about our town and ensuring that our public safety in all sectors is properly balanced and most importantly, accountable for everything that they do and what we expect them to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay Williams.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jay Williams. I'm a local attorney, similar to Carol Brown. I practice in the areas of family law and also some civil litigation. I'm also a member of the Annapolis, or the City of Annapolis Human Relations Commission, along with my fellow co-member Chuck Hurley, and at least advocating for the rights of or equal rights for all the citizens of the City of Annapolis, and excited to be a part of this process.
Thank you all. So I believe I covered everyone, and I do want to say before we move to the next item on our agenda that Annette, when you did mention the diversity of this panel, it is intentional, but also the awesome thing is we wanted to have an opportunity to have people who had expertise in a bunch of different areas, but also understood the importance of us having accountability, and also being able to, to really speak to different sectors involved in this conversation as we, create framework. I don't believe I did Rhonda McCoy. Did I? Rhonda, did I do you?
You did
I introduce you?
That's okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. You moved around on my screen, sorry.
I'm sorry, I blinked a little bit. Did we get Phil?
Nope, and we didn't get Phil either, but I don't see Phil on my screen. Oh, I see.
There we
what's
go.
going
I'll
on.
speak, so hopefully I'll pop up.
Yeah,
Thanks. Thanks, Rev Morris. Hey, everybody. Phil Ateto with CAST, longtime creative activist, artful activist, First Amendment envelope pusher. Happy we're all back together again, and Will, to see you at the helm. Thanks.
Yeah, you too. Yeah. Rhonda McCoy.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am Rhonda McCoy. I am the current professional standards manager for the Annapolis Police Department. I am tasked with implementing the state reforms to the Annapolis Police Department, making sure that we have good systems in order to support the law and move forward in accountability.
All right, and Rhonda is a very integral part of the conversations and the framing conversations that's happening between the city of Annapolis and the county, in Anne Arundel County. And so, you know, part of what she'll be doing this evening is giving us a run through of how those conversations have been going, and also kind of next steps at that level. So that'll kind of, you know, give us some insight as to what's going on and, you know, what to expect and how you all can possibly either become involved or just better informed about the process. So the next item on our agenda is meant to provide an overview of what happened at the state level in terms of legislation, which, you know, greatly impacts the work that we've attempted to do on the local level. We did, you know, just for some background, I'm sure a lot of you all know this, but we did begin this process many moons ago, I believe around 2015, where we began to have, and there are some people on this call like Jimmy Spearman, Phil, and Randy, who were a part of some of those original convenings that allowed us to have things like body cameras and other things, you know, locally with the Annapolis Police Department. So this is a continuation of a lot of that work. I wanted to, you know, preface it with that. So without further ado, I want to introduce Annette Emmanuel to give us an overview of state legislation. And if you all have questions, please feel free to ask them so that we can all stay on the same page as we move forward. So Annette, it's all yours.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, well, other members that have joined, we have, and I want to introduce them really quickly. So we have Monica Lindsay. Monica, can you hear me? No. And we have Stephen Waddy. Stephen, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. You want to introduce yourself? I don't know if that means no. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself? Okay, so we'll begin this agenda item of overview of what's happening in terms of implementation at the county level. Annette?
Thank you. So just really quickly before I dive into what we ended up with, I just want to kind of give an overview of what we were advocating for and why. So I'm sure as everyone on this call know, because they're on this call for a reason, is how important community control of police is and establishing that as a community-centered entity. So when we look at like what happened in the 60s, and when the demand for civilian oversight was really, I think, at its peak, and that was as a result of all of the uprisings that were happening at that time, which were a lot of it was because of all of the police brutality that was going on. And you had groups like the NAACP and even the Black Panther Party, where although they disagreed on a lot of things, agreed that what was critical.
Because your group is not the only one that has feelings like that. Part of the conversations I've had to have is to.
Thanks. Oh, okay. I think we got it together. So saying in the 60s, there were groups like the NAACP and the Black Panther Party that, while although might have not agreed on a lot of things, agreed on this specific demand that the community did need control over the police, and that looked like having an external community oversight board that had the ability to both investigate police officers and actually have a final authority in the discipline making decision, and as well as subpoena power. So this was something that was coming up all across the country, and the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights was a reaction to that, and for a long time has been an impediment to actually establishing real community oversight, specifically because there was a provision in there that said that any investigation conducted outside, any investigation that would lead to a discipline had to be conducted by a police officer. And so that really did hinder the community's ability to have conduct investigations that ultimately did lead to discipline. And that's important to know, because when we talk about kind of what passed and we talk about trial boards, that still continues to be an impediment to these community oversight boards having final decision-making powers. So I just wanted to kind of start there. And what we ended up with is better than what we previously had, but still is far away from actually having really effective oversight boards that do have these final decision-making powers. But I think creates an opportunity to at least create the infrastructure of these boards to ultimately get to that goal. So I just want to give that overview. So what we ended up with last session was HB 670, which ultimately repealed the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, but still maintained some of its worst provisions, which is trial boards. It's slightly different, and we'll talk about that later as far as who makes up the trial board, but the trial boards do have the final decision-making powers as far as discipline goes, and so that still creates an impediment to external community oversight boards from having that final decision-making power, as I mentioned. But additional to that, it does establish a new process relating to police disciplinary process, which we'll go into, and it mandates a civilian-run police accountability board and administrative charging committee in each jurisdiction. Additionally, it requires that the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission develop a uniform disciplinary matrix for law enforcement agencies. The bill also prohibits misconduct records from being expunged or destroyed by law enforcement agency once this bill goes into effect in July. And it prohibits a chief, it only allows a chief to fire a police officer that receives a probation before judgment for a felony or is convicted of a misdemeanor committed in a performance of their duties as a police officer, or a misdemeanor involving dishonesty, fraud, theft, and misrepresentation, which is also important to note because previously a police chief could only fire an officer if they were convicted of a felony and not any misdemeanor. So as I mentioned, the bill mandates that in each jurisdiction, there's a police accountability board implemented. These police accountability boards will be responsible for holding quarterly meetings with the heads of law enforcement agencies in the county to improve matters of policing, appoint civilian members to the charging committee and trial boards, which is really important thing to keep note of. They will also be able to receive complaints of police misconduct filed by members of the public. They're also responsible for quarterly review of outcomes of disciplinary matters considered by the charging committee, and annually submit a support that identifies the trends of disciplinary process of police officers in the county and recommendations to improve police accountability in the county. And it is up to the county council or the city council in each county to be responsible for establishing the membership of the police accountability board. They're appointed by the county executive or the mayor, but they will have to be confirmed by the council. And the council is also tasked with establishing a budget and staff of the Police Accountability Board that is written out in HB 670, as well as appointing the chair of the Police Accountability Board and establishing a procedures for record keeping. So I mentioned the charging committee, which the Police Accountability Board will be mostly responsible for appointing. This administrative charging committee will be made up of one, the chair of the Police Accountability Board or their designee, as well as 2 civilians appointed by the Police Accountability Board and 2 civilians appointed by the county executive. There'll also be a statewide charging committee that is made up of 3 civilians appointed by the governor, 1 civilian appointed by the president of the Senate, and 1 civilian appointed by the Speaker of the House. This charging committee will be responsible for reviewing the findings of the law enforcement agency's investigation, deciding whether or not to administratively charge the police officer, and if the police officer is charged, recommend discipline in accordance with the matrix that I mentioned earlier, and review body camera footage, as well as issue a written opinion that describes in detail its findings, determinations, and recommendations. As I mentioned, the bill also still keeps intact trial boards, but it does change the makeup of the trial board. So now the trial board would be made up of an actively serving or retired administrative law judge or retired judge for the district court or circuit court that would be appointed by the CEO of the county, which is the county executive, a civilian who is not a member of either the administrative charging committee or the police accountability board that is appointed by the police accountability board. And a police officer of equal rank appointed by the head of a law enforcement agency. So this is kind of what the new process looks like. the Police Accountability Board receives a complaint. Once they receive that complaint, they are charged with forwarding that complaint to the appropriate law enforcement agency that is then responsible for conducting that investigation. Also, people can still submit complaints directly to the law enforcement department. So after these complaints are submitted, an investigation is conducted. Upon the completion of investigation, those findings are then forwarded directly to the administrative charging committee of that county. That administrative charging committee is responsible for reviewing it, as I mentioned, and then determining whether or not the officer is found guilty or not, or in this case, administratively charged or not. If that officer is charged, then they are to determine what that discipline is using that matrix. Then they share that discipline with the chief. So they ultimately decide what that discipline is, but the chief is able to go above the matrix, above what the administrative charging committee, the discipline the charging committee rendered. So, but they cannot, the chief cannot deviate below. So they can give a harsher punishment, but cannot give a lesser punishment than what the administrative charging committee has given that officer. The officer has a ability to accept the discipline or reject. And if they do reject that discipline, they are still entitled to going before a trial board. And once they go before a trial board, they render the final decision, and whatever decision they make is final. So that is the new process. So as I mentioned, this bill goes into effect on July 1st. So local jurisdictions are actively looking to implement this bill locally to get these boards up and running in order to be in compliance with the board. So we've been working with different groups around the state in the implementation process of this, and have pulled together a guide because there are opportunities to go further than what the bill did on the local level, and making sure that this board is implemented properly. So the potential areas of influence with this board is in the membership of the Police Accountability Board and the charging committee. The membership of the board is really critical, especially since they are going to be the ones that are appointing people to this charging committee and this trial board. We're recommending in other jurisdictions, like Montgomery County last night, we had a hearing with these recommendations, and that is that the community should have a say in who's appointed to these boards. So community organizations and groups should be able to nominate people to this, to be considered as appointees. And before the council confirms appointees, there should be a public comment period so that the community can weigh in and there's transparency in who they're considering. There should be, it's mandated by the state law that there's a budget created for the Police Accountability Board. And that is also really critical because historically, boards that have existed, like the civilian, like the Baltimore Civilian Review Board, have historically been underfunded and under-resourced. So even though they have these investigatory powers, they have the subpoena powers, and they have a board that is there's like a member of each police district on the board, so they have that citywide representation. They have been under-resourced and underfunded, so they haven't been able to be as effective, and also limited in their powers to what they can investigate, have not been able to carry out their duties effectively due to that. So the budget is really critical. In some different jurisdictions, they will attach a percentage of the police department's budget to the Civilian Review Board. In Baltimore City, currently we have a proposal that we've introduced where we're asking at least 2% of the police department's budget go to the Civilian Review Board so that they are adequately funded. Also, there is nothing prohibiting in the state law that these police accountability boards cannot have investigatory powers. This was something that we were advocating for aggressively last session, but ultimately did not get. So something that these local police accountability boards can do is have investigatory power so that the administrative charging committee is not solely dependent on internal affairs investigations. Next, another thing that another room or opportunity for advocacy on the local level is the authority for the Police Accountability Board to recommend discipline to the charging committee. So if they're conducting their own investigations and they come up with a different conclusion than internal affairs, this is asking that they have ability to at least recommend to the charging committee, who ultimately has that final decision-making powers. And then additional reporting requirements that might be helpful is also something that's a another area where the local bill could go a step further than what the state law did. This is just kind of an overview of kind of the different things that the budget could go towards. So I mentioned investigatory. If the police accountability boards have investigatory powers, then it's important that they actually have investigators. So like Prince George's County has investigative powers, and they have an oversight, citizen complaint oversight panel that was established in 1990. They have investigatory powers, but they only have a $300,000 budget, and most of that goes to the actual staff. And so there's very little that's allocated to the actual investigators. So that's something that could be a budget could be allocated to hiring how many investigators that county sees fit to keep up with the demand. Also, additionally, support like paying for independent counsel. That's something else the budget could go for, policy analysts and other administrative supportive staff. And I mentioned a little bit about the membership. The membership of the board is really critical, as is anything. You could have a really effective board, but if the membership is not actually reflective of the community, it won't be as effective or impactful. So it's really critical that the board reflects the community, and one way that we can guarantee this is by allowing the actual community and community organizations to have an opportunity to nominate members to serve the board. And it's really critical that the boards are not really too restrictive. I think sometimes our natural instinct is to be really restrictive, and the honest truth is that you cannot really legislate community engagement. It's really about how you organize people. And so there should definitely be guardrails in place, like we believe that no current or previous law enforcement officers should be sitting on the board, especially with voting powers. If a board is going to have police officers on it, it should be they should be non-voting members. And even with advocacy organizations like the ACLU or the NAACP, they should also be non-voting members to be able to share that institutional knowledge and history that we might be able to offer, but that board should really be in for the community. I think so. I'll stop here. This is going into just what the county is currently proposing, which I think somebody else is going to be going over, but that's kind of just an overview of where we landed and some recommendations that were shared with different counties.
Thank you so much, Annette. I want to thank you so much for being thorough with that, but also providing us with some, really pertinent information as it relates to what was determined at the state level. I do want to ask our members if there are any questions. Please ask questions now, so that there's some clarity. Does anyone have any questions or observations at this point?
Yeah, Will, this is Frank. I have one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for laying that framework out. It's very, very clear. Are there any timelines that have been assigned to any of the processes yet? Some of I think the greatest angst comes from, when an incident becomes illuminated, the time it takes to get a response and start getting some information, back to the public. Again, there's certain rights and other processes that have to take place in parallel, but has there been a discussion in that direction over?
Yes, I think, Annette, do you have a proposed timeline of some key decision points or things that are going to happen? Do you have that, or do you want me to walk through?
Are you talking about the county in implementing this, or with the new disciplinary process?
I would say a little bit of both, but kind of where the county is right now on implementation, or like ramping up to different points.
And then what's the expectation that once the process gets in place, what are, what kind of cycles, timeline cycles can legislation, either prescribing or being set up by the individual boards?
So I can speak a little bit about the disciplinary process. I know that after an administrative charging committee receives a file, and they have, I think, about 30 days to render a decision. Once the police accountability receives a complaint, they have to turn that over within 3 days to the police department so they can start that investigation. And then once the administrative charging committee makes a decision, they have at least 15 days before they have to turn that over to the chief. But the one thing to keep in mind is that there is no time stamp in at least the bill that passed last session of when IA has to conclude an investigation. So that is a concern about department slow walking investigations. And so I want to note that for you all. As far as the implementation goes, the boards do have to be up and running by July 1st, which was what the legislator said is why they had that 1 year kickback before the bill actually goes into effect. So departments, since the bill passed last April, not departments, jurisdictions were supposed to start getting ready to make this implementation process. What we're seeing now is that now that it's January, a lot of jurisdictions are just now thinking about this. But luckily, we've been paying attention to this for community oversight for a long time, but also just the implementation process since April. So we pulled together a guide and trying to guide different jurisdictions in the implementation process, but there's I think that'll depend on the different local jurisdictions implementation process and how the council moves the bill. So I know in Anne Arundel County, I think there's going to be a hearing February 7th, and they have a timeline set up of when they want this board up and running and recruiting members, which I think William will go over. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you for that. That was a lot. There's a lot there, but I appreciate that overview. I was wondering if there's any aspect of the board that is going to be public in any way, either in a limited fashion or are they going to submit written reports? I know there's an annual report or something they have to complete, but how much of what they're doing is the public going to know?
So I know that the charging committee is not supposed to be sharing information until after investigation is completed and they have some kind of disclosure agreement that they have to keep in mind. The Police Accountability Board is going to be the ones finalizing and creating those reports. My reading of the bill is that those do have to be public reports. And something to be mindful of and what we're seeing in different jurisdictions is that there are attempts to try to silence also the police accountability boards. So there was a proposal in Howard County to require the PAB members to sign non-disclosure forms and stuff like that. We saw that in Calvert County as well. And those are things that we're actively trying to push back against because we think that the Police Accountability Board should be able to share information that is public, and all that the state law prohibits is that they can't share anything that otherwise would not be released under the Maryland Public Information Act, which is already descriptive, and I don't think we need to go more beyond that.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Reverend Morris has her hand up and I have mine up as well.
Reverend Morris.
Thank you so much. Jeanette, that presentation was awesome. Thank you so much for the thoroughness and the ease of which we could comprehend what you've presented on today. So I really appreciate all that your organization is doing. My question is a couple. When I looked at, I think it was something about misdemeanors. Is that the only way? Does an officer have to be convicted of a misdemeanor to be terminated? Because I saw that it said convicted of a misdemeanor, and then it said something about misdemeanor. So can they be, can you clarify that part?
Yeah, so what we had advocated that if the officer was convicted of any crime, that it'd be up to the chief's discretion whether or not they'd be able to fire that officer. But what ended up passing and was amended onto the bill was that a chief is allowed to fire an officer who, one, receives probation before judgment for a felony, is convicted of a misdemeanor committed in the performance of their duties as a police officer, and then a misdemeanor involving dishonesty, fraud, theft, or misrepresentation.
So when you convicted, I'll say, okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more, because officially convicted means he's already gone through the process, right? But being charged or found to have done this, I'm wondering if that would be reason for us to demand, if we were on the board or whatever, that he be terminated. But also the question is will this be going forward, do you know, for counties? The only way that complaints will be handled if they go through the submitting to the police department and they have to come through the board? I know that's kind of
really quickly to your first question, I think any changes that are going to be made to what, when and how a chief can fire a police officer will require amending the state law. So I don't think that's something that the Police Accountability Board could advocate for in that specific respect, but I would love somebody else to double check, but that's my understanding of that. And to your second question, I'm sorry, could you repeat your second question?
My second question is just wondering what the processes will be going forward in the state. In other words, there are two options we see. One, going directly to the police department, which has been problematic forever, and then coming through the Police Accountability Board. Or will those be the only two ways that complaints will be handled by citizens? Or that a citizen can make a complaint? Go ahead.
To my understanding, yes, unless there's some departments which I'm not knowledgeable about that can file complaints online. I don't think that's currently a thing in Maryland, but they would have to file a complaint either with the police department or the Police Accountability Board. If it's made with the Police Accountability Board, within 3 days, it's transferred over to the police department, but there's no requirement that a complaint made with the police department is transferred over to the Police Accountability Board, if that makes sense. So in some jurisdictions, that's an extra requirement that folks want to see, is that complaints made with the police department, it's also shared with the Police Accountability Board, just so that they can make sure that they're on the onset having transparency over different complaints that are coming in, and not just when the charging committee is finished investigating these different complaints.
Thank you, and that is very critical. Thank you.
James? Oh, you're muted.
Hi, good evening. I'll give a brief answer to Marguerite, Reverend Marguerite. One of the reasons why they don't terminate the officer before he goes to trial is because you still have to have your due process. And if for whatever reason the officer is found not guilty, the agency could face a lawsuit because they fired him before guilt or innocence was rendered. So my question, I have two questions. One, who makes up the administrative charging committee? That's the first one. And the second one is, in the process, I'm a little confused because in the past, whenever there was an officer went before a trial board, it was because they didn't believe that they were guilty of the charges they were accused of. Had nothing to do with them not agreeing with the punishment. So why don't they have a process where if they don't agree with the punishment, they can go through and have someone review independent of that, rather than having a full-blown trial board? That would save more time and that would save money if it was done that way.
I think we completely agree with you there, James. To your first question, so for the administrative charging committee, it is made up of 3 people that are appointed. So one, the chair of the Police Accountability Board can serve on the administrative charging committee, or they can assign a designee of theirs. So it can be somebody else from the board. Additionally, the Police Accountability Board can appoint 2 other members from the community to serve on the administrative charging committee as well. Not necessarily anyone from the board, but someone from the community. And then the 2 other members, so it's a 5-member board, the 2 other members are supposed to be civilians appointed by the county executive. So the Police Accountability Board does appoint the majority of the folks to the charging committee, which again is why the membership of these boards are really critical, because if you have a Police Accountability Board that is influenced by the council or the county executive, they can appoint people that they want on this charging committee versus actual members of the community that will be more accountable to the community. And to your other question, as far as the trial board goes, we advocated that we should completely get rid of trial boards, and that officers would have an ability to have a hearing officer that they can and an ability to contest the charges. That doesn't necessarily go before a trial board, but do have that opportunity to say this wasn't fair. But that's ultimately not what we ended up with, and we landed was with the trial board, and they believe that would be an opportunity for the officer to contest their charge. But we just believe that it just hinders community oversight and their ability to have the final decision-making powers. Because even if most cases don't go to the trial board, the fact that they are the final decision-making powers really does stand in the way of the Police Accountability Board, for example, being able to discipline officers. I hope that makes sense.
It does perfectly.
It makes it. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to add, actually, I can wait until you're done if you have more, Jimmy.
I was just going to say that I believe that the officers still should be able to have a trial board because there are times when the chiefs have vendettas against police officers and they find ways to charge them with petty charges. And the only recourse they would have would be a trial board. I've been a victim of that. And I was in favor of having open trial boards, and I had 2 trial boards and they were both closed. I wanted the public involved, and I wanted people on the outside to see what was going on, and I was denied both times. And so in doing this, you need to consider that all officers aren't bad. And when officers get charged with something, it doesn't necessarily mean they did something nefarious. If they were guilty of it, they might have just broke a rule. And so there's no, it just needs to be a fair, balanced process, because you're talking about somebody's career, you're talking about someone who put their life on the line, and all of the officers that go out there are not bad. The ones who are bad should be dealt with, but everybody deserves due process. And I'm telling you, I've been through what I've been through. You wouldn't believe it. And so I think there needs to be a fair process, because you're talking about people's reputation, their word, and their credibility. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. And we've seen also the same thing happen with officers who've gone through the trial board process as well, where the trial board has been weaponized against them, and the odds are stacked against them. And, you know, it's clear as day to anybody else that this officer was innocent, and the trial board was stacked with officers who went with the chief instead. So we've seen it play out both ways. And so what we wanted was just a process where it streamlined who is accountable for police accountability. So we wanted the final decision to be with the chief, not because we trusted the chief, but at least then the chief can't hide behind the trial board decision and say, my hands are tied, you know, this was the trial board's decision. But instead having 100% agree with you that it should be a fair process, but it should be with a hearing officer and not this mandatory trial board that has final decision-making power, because they ultimately can be procedurally get in the way of us being able to have external entities that have the final decision-making power, but wanted to still give officers the opportunity to contest the charges brought before them, but just not through the trial board process, if that makes sense. And I'd be happy to send you the bill that we had last year that kind of details this process that we had laid out, in case I might not be explaining it clearly.
When you say decision-making process, are you speaking on punishment, or are you speaking on guilt versus innocence?
No, I'm talking about like procedurally, because the law says the trial board has final decision-making power. We cannot give any final decision-making power to any external entity. So the way that this process is laid out, because the final stop is the trial board, we wanted to create a process where streamline the chief as a final decision-making power. That way that if a county had a civilian oversight board, that civilian oversight board just stepped in that same process that was laid out, would just then take over the place of the chief and the entity conducting the investigations, if that makes sense. So it would be
Well, you're fixing one problem and creating another. And I'm not trying to be argumentative. The purpose of the trial board was to determine guilt or innocence. That's the whole purpose of a trial board. It means that you're accusing me of something and I'm saying I didn't do it. And you have a 3-member panel, and it's just like court. You present your accusation, your complaints, and you cite the rules that you believe I violated. And I come back and I say, no, I didn't do that. I didn't do this, and I didn't do that. And then that panel makes a final decision on whether or not I broke the rules or not. And I don't have a problem with the civilians handling that task. I just think that eliminating the trial board process is not going to give you what you're looking for, because that's the officers want their due process. If it gets to the point where they want a trial board, then they generally believe they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Now, I'm not talking about across the board. There's no absolute. When I asked for a trial board, it's because I believed I was innocent, and I didn't believe that I didn't do what they said I did. But I want community involvement because I want you to be there as a watchdog to say, oh boy, this chief is not doing it right. So that's my point to all of this. I'm saying that you should keep the trial board, but you should have more civilian oversight and more input. And I'm trying to understand what you say decision-making process, because once again, the trial board means guilt or innocence. So the chief decides punishment. So I'm trying to understand or get the distinction between guilt versus innocence, or the punishment.
I think we're saying the same thing. I think when I'm describing a hearing board, it's describing the same thing that you're saying and would have that same function. But procedurally, the trial board having the final decision-making process and the way that the structure has been laid out has been an impediment. So what we were advocating for was that there still be a hearing officer that would be able to do what you just said and determine guilt and innocence. It just would not be a board that is appointed by the chief, and instead be an independent hearing officer. And so right, so they would still have that ability to contest the charges brought against them, but it just would not be this trial board that the chief has had historically had power in appointing. And even now with this process, it is one civilian added to it, but then you have a police officer and a judge. Some might consider a judge a civilian, some might not. So we just wanted one person to be able to contest that, and not this board that could, depending on the county, that could get an officer. But I think we're definitely in alignment there.
Right, and I want to jump in really quickly to say, first of all, this conversation and all of the questions and comments are exactly what we need to be doing, just to be more informed, and to also have dialogue about the process and the particulars of the framework, like the structure of PAB as well as charging committee. So the distinction, though, right now, and anyone correct me when I'm off base with it, is that right now those decisions are not where they were when we were trying to develop a local civilian review board. What's happening now is it's in the county's hands, right? It's in the county executive hands and the county council. So I did want to run through the timeline really quickly, just so that we know kind of where we are and where we've been. In January, which is now, what's been happening is there were stakeholder engagement meetings with some key stakeholders in Anne Arundel County that kind of gave their feedback and some of the wishes of what they would like to see in terms of framework. February 7th, again, which is a key date, is when they will introduce the county local legislation. That's when they'll make their announcement about exactly what that looks like. And there's a process that they're working through right now to arrive at that date. I do believe what's going to happen also in March is there'll be some opportunities for public hearings and an opportunity for the council to meet and have conversations about the iteration of this legislation at the local level. And then, again, as Jeanette said, in July is when this is supposed to become live, to hit the ground, where they'll have a process not only in place, but then it'll take effect in July. Are there any other questions? I also did really quickly when I introduced the people who joined our meeting that weren't here previously. And someone has a mic on and I can hear ambient sounds. But we have Harold Mo Lloyd. Are you here, Mo? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I tried. All right, okay, you want to introduce yourself, Mo?
Oh yeah, so I'm Harold Mo Lloyd, Annapolis native and resident, creator of my own nonprofit, Superior Future, a social activist in the community, especially when it involves the youth in Annapolis. Also was one of the leaders of many Black Lives Matter protests, helped spearhead a lot of change in Annapolis regarding the way that we want to relook at police, the way we want to reform police. So it's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Mo.
Hey, I had to tell him, look, I can't be sitting up here all night.
Rhonda, your mic is on.
See, we get, see, Zoom is crazy, right? Okay, so now we have so Rhonda, that was right on time. So I don't know if you did that on purpose.
Well,
And
I have a question before
And
you
this
go.
is Marguerite Morris, when you get a chance, Will.
Okay, all right. So who had a question? I'm sorry.
I do, Randy.
Randy, okay. Thank you, Randy. Please go
Yes,
ahead.
I'll follow Randy, please.
Okay, thank you,
No
Margaret.
problem. All right, the question I have is, Annette or anyone else who can answer it. The new police reform PowerPoint you just put up, and I think it's a good thing. Police chiefs now have discretion and discipline with misdemeanors. For the misdemeanor, one of them said that dishonesty, they have the discretion now to terminate the officer for dishonest acts, right? Integrity violations on a department. How does that affect Giglio and Brady, if it affects it at all?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, Giglio and Brady, the two case laws involving police dishonesty and integrity violations in law enforcement. Brady versus Maryland, Giglio versus United States. Does that new law with misdemeanors affect Giglio and Brady laws? The police chief's discretion and fire them, and it's not a crime because Giglio and Brady are not crimes, but they could still be terminated. The law doesn't call for them to be terminated, but they could be terminated, right? Because if they can't take police reports and they can't testify in court, right, then a lot of—
Did he cut off for anybody else?
Yes,
Yep.
he did. He
Yeah,
definitely cut off.
I can't hear him.
Yeah, I don't hear him either.
Okay, so I do want to, in lieu of time, I do want to, we can loop back in with Randy when he returns, but I want to jump to Rhonda McCoy. Can you hear me, Rhonda?
May I go ahead with my inquiry?
Oh, that's
I don't know if she can hear you now.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. First of all, I really want to commend the retired officers that are on the line. I really need, thank you for your service, and Mr. Spearman, if you lent voice to my situation, my case. And I want to say also that if it were not for the testimony and the honesty and transparency of police officers, I would not have overturned an erroneous Anne Arundel County decision on the death of my daughter. So I wanted to say that. I wanted to say also that internal versus external in the complaints. The Police Accountability Board, they're handling the external, right? So we really don't have say-so over the internal complaints. Isn't that two different things? This is the citizens complaining, and this gives us some kind of civilian say-so in that. But this doesn't help an officer, right, if he's charged with external things that have nothing to do with the public. Is that a right analysis of this, Annette, or anyone?
That is correct. And to Randy's question real quick, that was a great question and one I've never gotten before. So I'd love to, I'm gonna look into that and circle back for you. And then to your question, Ms. Morris, absolutely. So the Police Accountability Board will only be receiving complaints from the public. And it's really important also to just back up a second and understand that all the state law really requires is that the Police Accountability Board review complaints that are coming in and then evaluate decisions that the charging committee makes, and then appointing people to these different boards. But so the other stuff that we discussed it is how on the local level you can go beyond what the state law demanded. But to your point, it's only they're only going to be tasked. The administrative charging committee will only be tasked of reviewing complaints from the public, not these internal complaints or issues that officers receiving complaints externally or internally, which is a real concern because we know, and I have heard from lots of officers of how complaints are weaponized against them and their frivolous complaints made all the time. And in fact, that's why some officers that we've talked to, mostly Black officers, are really supportive of oversight boards because they want these complaints to be investigated by somebody independently and some transparency and oversight over that, because that is something that is weaponized against them, but that's not something that this bill solves.
Okay, thank you. And I wanted to add one more point. Thank you. I know the hour's late. I just want to say this really quickly. In Anne Arundel County to date, as far as I know, there has been no public input to date. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on whatever's coming out or attended at this very moment, because we only have 19 days and 13 business days before February the 7th, before something's presented. So we really have to pay attention to what's being said, listen, whatever we need to do to try to inform the public and ourselves. So, and also the county to date, as far as I know, Anne Arundel County has had the Civilian Review Board wish list. So they know what we'd like to have. But to date, there's been no discussion, even though we've had meetings with our input as civilian community. So I say that, I turn my mic off, and if I'm incorrect, someone please, I just want to present that for your thought. Thank you.
So thank you so much. And as we close out after our next agenda item, before we close out, we're going to offer people who are on this panel an opportunity to be involved in some of those discussions, Reverend Marguerite. So, if there's input or information that they need, they have access to be able to find out what kind of conversations are taking place. Okay. So right now,
Will, I have one last question, really a request, and that is this panel, this group of people is so resourceful, competent, experienced. I was wondering, will we have an opportunity to have a contact list among ourselves? For instance, phone numbers. I mean, I can look at the email, but the phone numbers, I would love to be able to just pick up the phone and call people. I have things going on. Will we be able to have, maybe a directory of ourselves? I'm willing. Everyone can have my information. I mean, I got the emails, but, I was wondering about that.
I absolutely have a list that I can share that gives you all an opportunity to kind of cross-pollinate and also just, develop relationships, because there's other cross sections of work that can be done also. So that's a very good point, Carol. Thank you for that. So Rhonda McCoy. Rhonda, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Will.
Okay, so one of the, where this, all of this leads us, and I want to thank you, Annette, and I think we should all thank you, Annette, right now for a thorough, comprehensive, rendering of what's been going on, not only at the state level, but just, all parts of the construct of the Police Accountability Board, charging committees, all of those things. I want to thank you, Annette. I really appreciate it. And I think it's been really helpful and really informative to all of us.
Thank you for having me. And I'll also want to mention, you can feel free to give my email or phone number out to anybody who'd like to follow up. And if I didn't get to any questions tonight, please feel free to shoot me an email. And Randy, I'd love if you could shoot me an email with your question just to make sure I captured it correctly, and would love to follow up with that. And I also sent you a document I'd like to share with James to just go over what passed last session, in case that would be helpful or you'd like to have that.
Yes, I'll email you. And also, if you don't mind, can you send your PowerPoint as well?
Absolutely, yes.
All right.
Thank you so much, Annette. So where we land right now is what has been transpiring with our local officials, as well as our local governmental body with the county. And one person that we're lucky to have on this call, and lucky to be really involved in these conversations, is Rhonda McCoy, who has been in all of those convenings. And I wanted to give Rhonda an opportunity to lend some insight as to that process and what's been happening with that, but also some next steps and what's going to be happening at that level. So Rhonda, would you be interested in doing that for us now?
Yes. First, I wanted to kind of address two things. One was the ability for people to make a complaint. And we have gone over it, and the way we understand it is it's an external complaint. However, if the officer is charged with any misconduct, so if, a misconduct complaint, if that comes in and that's internal, it would go to the charging committee. That is our interpretation and understanding. of what's going to happen. I can clarify that with Carrie Berger, but that is the way that we understand it, that it is external complaints by citizens and any misconduct that internal or external would go to that charging committee.
Interesting.
And so what another thing that we wanted to say as well is that when the legislation first became law, Annapolis has been very, very proactive in implementing those reforms. So we started an implementation group in August. We met in small group. July, we formed our implementation group. We have been conversing and talking with the county to say, yes, we need to get together. We need to talk about what's going to happen. And we have been very, very adamant because we have been talking about this from a budget standpoint on what it was going to, what we believed it was going to cost in Annapolis, and making sure that those items were in the budget to actually do the whole bill, because this is just a small part of the police reform bill. But very, very, very adamant that Annapolis residents have to be recognized on that accountability board. The county executive and the county council have agreed to have one person from Annapolis, to put it into their legislation that one person from Annapolis has to be on the board. We talked this morning. We wanted more language like shall. So once that person was chosen by the mayor and city council, the county would not have the opportunity to remove that person. That would be the person on the board. And now we're kind of talking about that administrative charging committee. I think that, it's imperative that, we have in all three entities, whether it be the accountability board or whether it be the administrative charging committee, that someone from Annapolis should sit on that administrative charging committee, and that the trial boards, we don't necessarily want, the language is that it has to be a judge, it has to be a citizen, and it has to be a peer for the officer. But, do we want somebody from Pasadena sitting on a trial board for somebody from Annapolis? And so those are some things, that we need to consider. Other things that, we are where we are now, of course, Will has filled you in on that, that there will be February 7th, the county will be introducing their bill. I know I've seen a number of you that attended the county's presentation of the bill. On March 7th, they intend on having public hearings and taking comment on the bill. By April or May, they kind of want to stand up that accountability board, because as you know, the accountability board appoints the administrative charging committee. And so they want to kind of, time things out to have it, to where July 1st, if there's an incident that happens July 1st, that even though it would still have to float through investigation, but by July 1st, the accountability board can receive a complaint and then forward it to the entities. As you all know, that, this is a lot of working parts. And I know that in theory, people say like, okay, let's do this. But, it has a whole lot of working parts. We call them the 5 families. That's an Annapolis PD. There's Anne Arundel PD. There is the school, Anne Arundel Community College. There's Crofton, and there's the sheriff's office. Each of us have different computer systems. We all have different policies and procedures, and to get all of this to work, we have to come together in this amount of time to work and work out all those logistics that need to be done, and that we wanted to assure you all that we are working very, very diligently, not just to, just to do the accountability board, but to ensure that the full reform bill is implemented by the provisions that have to be implemented by July 1st are implemented by July 1st. But, there is a lot of work to do, a whole lot of work to do, still work that we have to do with the county. Once the laws pass, there still has to be rules, written to support the new law and different things and how how we report, how to report to get to to the administrative charging committee, and all those logistical things that we are working out.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, are there any questions?
I had a question about the disciplinary process supposed to be coming down. It's uniform statewide now and under the HB 670, and it's supposed to be, I guess, crafted by the Maryland Police Training Standards Commission. And I'm wondering whether or not you've heard from them or what your understanding of that process is.
So I know that a number of different agencies have, as you know, Baltimore City, for instance, they're under consent decree. So they have been working on a disciplinary matrix for about 2 years now. And I think they had just finalized it when the state has come or close to finalizing it, when the state had said that we all have to move to one disciplinary matrix. So we have been in talks with, other agencies, with the training commission. They're still working on a draft of that matrix, but I know that it's coming soon. They're very, very close to giving us a draft. And of course, we all are pushing, towards, yes, let's get the draft, because we just can't get the draft. We have to get the draft, and we have to craft policy around that matrix. So, there are a number of new policies that we have to write, but we cannot write them until after the training commission does its work.
Can I follow up real quick? Do you understand that the early warning system is also a part of that new disciplinary matrix?
Yes.
So if an officer has, like 4 complaints, then they, within a certain amount of time, then they're on this early warning system from their supervisors. So I'm wondering whether or not that also is an issue.
Well, as a provision of the reform bill, it tells that we have to create an early warning system for those jurisdictions who have not created it. They have to create one. In Annapolis, we are quite fortunate that we already have an early warning system. Now, the early warning system mentioned in the legislation mentions use of force. We are going further in Annapolis, in the Annapolis Police Department, to say not just use of force, but everything. Is going to be on an early warning system with a timetable. Right now, we have it set to, 3 or more complaints for anything would trigger an early warning.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions around what was just discussed?
I also wanted to say that, it is going to be key that, a number of you, when they do have those meetings, and that you do, voice your, your concern that, Annapolis, represented on that administrative charging committee. And that, there should be some language built into the trial boards, stating that, we don't know what the makeup is. We know that the accountability board names somebody to the trial board. But if all those people, again, are, it makes it kind of, it makes it kind of difficult. And, the people, want to know that, that they're being heard locally. And so I think that very early on, as the pastor said, that, you all need to start like writing and talking to people to say that these are some of the things that you want.
Right. And I want to add, to what you're saying about next steps, because that's kind of the last agenda item before we depart, is really being intentional about plugging you all in to what some of these conversations end up creating. And so we've been lucky enough to receive information about the legislation, and we've also been lucky enough to hear from Rhonda McCoy about what's taking place in terms of our agency in this county and other agencies. And so the next thing is, as a body, because you all have been involved in this conversation before they began this work at the county level, what I want to be sure of is that I'm providing you all dates and opportunities to provide input, but also for you all to talk to each other about, some of the, the visions you have in terms of accountability, police accountability. So what I'm going to do on my side is I will forward you all some dates of meetings and convenings that are happening, and I'll forward you opportunities for you all to provide input. And I'll also, most of the things that we've discussed today, I'll provide to you, so you'll have some documents to kind of, read yourself and become more educated on, what the next steps are at the county level, because I think that's very, very important. It isn't completely a letdown that we're not able to do it in Annapolis, because my belief is that the resources at the county level will be much greater. It'll allow us an opportunity to really, as has been discussed, to provide a hopefully.
Sound went off.
I think Will went off.
He's frozen.
Well, you're frozen.
We can't hear you, Will.
Yeah, he's
Terms of
resting his
account-
eye. I will.
Pardon?
You froze. You were there with your eyes closed and the screen froze.
Wow, I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi.
You
but,
were saying that you were going to send us materials for us to read.
Yes, I will send. Thank you so much, Tatiana. I will send information on all of these subjects for you all to read as I get them and as they're updated in terms of timeline and dates that are really pertinent and important as they relate to next steps at the county level. I don't know if you heard this part, and hopefully I'm not frozen with my eyes closed, but this part is important, that I did say, and in the work that you all have been doing, it's really, really important that we receive representation at the county level in these conversations and moving forward, because we want to be sure that our agency is not only represented, but also that some of the things that you all have been discussing this past year really, really do land on someone's desk that's able to understand that perspective as well. And since you all, did do trainings with NACO, and we did have that Civilian Oversight 101 training, I think you all are pretty much up to speed on what accountability looks like. So I want to close out with that, and I want to offer another opportunity if there are any more comments or observations that were made about this process. And it just dawned on me that I'm not sure if everyone understood why there was a lull from last year. And it's because in March of last year, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and had to do surgery and 6 months of chemo. So I do apologize that this process was, was somewhat slowed up and stopped.
No need to apologize.
Don't apologize. Like I said, we're so happy to. You look so healthy. Your cheeks are like, you look fabulous. I'm so happy.
Grateful to God for your healing, for your here being with us. Just thank you for being, and thank God you're here. You're
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Amen.
Yeah,
been through
I
a lot.
appreciate that. And I want to thank you all for, for staying in this process and being diligent in this process, because I know it can be somewhat tedious and nerve-wracking because, some things just take longer. So I thank you all for sticking with it. I'm going to forward you all the information I can. I'll keep you in the loop. As Carol said, I'll be sure to connect, to send you all information so that you all can connect with each other offline and be able to develop those relationships and maybe become more schooled on some subjects. So Annette.
I don't think she's still.
I think she's gone.
She's not still with us, Will.
And you're frozen again, Will.
Yeah, Will's frozen again.
Oh, we can make fun of him now.
Yeah.
Take a picture and send it to him. Hold up.
Oh my God, it's so hilarious the way his face is frozen too.
I think he's got internet narcolepsy.
At his expense, that's so not fair.
But it's so fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my camera. Where's the camera? Hold on.
Oh, I got it. I got a photo of it. He's gonna have to pay me because I posted the screenshot of us all on the meeting. He's gonna have to pay me to keep this one off. If I was able to find your Facebook page, I Facebook friended some of you that I wasn't friends with.
Awesome. I also posted a picture as well, so you guys can.
I think he left the room.
I just want to say,
help.
I just want to say that. Meeting with the county
does that mean we can leave?
That's what I was going to ask. I don't know if he's having.
Hey, no, he's coming back. Give him a moment. Give him a moment. If not, we'll make an executive decision.
Is there? I know that this isn't like that this board doesn't follow parliamentary procedure because it's a little ad hoc. Is anyone sort of a second in command? Because I don't know if him leaving was him being done or if him leaving was him having internet issues. Oh,
I think he had internet issues.
It would probably be you because you're with the city of Annapolis, so you would probably be second.
Oh, he's back! No, everyone stop talking about him because he's back on screen.
Yeah, I'm sure y'all was talking about me. Look, please connect my Wi-Fi.
Will, they got pictures.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my Wi-Fi, but I did want to say thank you all for your time and commitment. And if there's anything, the last thing I said, if there's anything anyone wants to, any comments or observations anyone wants to make before we close, I do want to close soon because of time. So does anyone have?
Will,
yes.
I have one thing that this is a very, very big, comprehensive legislation. So it's not just the accountability board. And I'm really asking that everybody read each one of the bills or each one of the laws that were passed. I can send you all kind of a sheet with a breakdown of what they are, but it's not just the accountability board. And I know that that was your focus, but I think that, you would be interested in some other things that that the bill did get passed. Mm-hmm. And that we are working very diligently to implement, and that some of the things that we would like your input and help as far as the Annapolis Police Department when we do start writing or crafting policy to see the law fulfilled.
Right, and to your point, Rhonda, I mean that's a very good point, because do you all believe, and this is a voting moment maybe, but do you all believe that we should have other meetings, maybe information meetings, or an opportunity to get more information as we move forward? Because I know Marguerite and others are working, and Stephen are working, and Jimmy, and everybody's working diligently in real time. So do you all think we can possibly have other meetings?
Yeah.
because there's an opportunity for us to do that if everyone is okay with that. I can definitely schedule some updates for us. Okay.
This is Margarita. I think it's important because of the getting the input in reference to that representative that will be on that board and how that's going to be impacted. And if I'm listening, I heard one member, then I heard that they need 2 members. So those are the things that it's important for Annapolis to identify, as well as make sure that the PAB that's being presented is representative of all the county, and everyone on this line understands what that document looks like and has clear input and agreement.
Okay, so this is what I'll do. I will forward all of the information about the legislation, about what's going on next step, some timeline information. I'll also connect with Rhonda about and be sure that the information she has that she said she wanted to send you, that she has all the correct addresses and information to send them to. And then I'll loop back around and maybe we'll schedule a meeting to do an update and, just to keep you all in the loop of where we are. And then if there are recommendations from you all as a panel, we can be sure that they're forwarded to the decision makers at the county. So I think that'll be an opportunity to do that. Is everyone okay with that?
I see Carol has her hand up, but I want to, can I say this and beat me up later? Hold on, let me turn this down. And that's somebody we know calling me. Let me turn them down. Hold on a second. Somebody was on. I think it's important that to say this, Will, that persons, when we talk about sending the recommendations to the county, that they send that through the proper resources so that we're not working on something and then they're getting these emails from individuals on here that are contradicting the one document we're collectively working on.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And thank you for pointing that out, because I think we do need to create a channel. And that's why it's important to share information so we can create a channel of communication. So I agree with that. And I'll be sure to, to not bifurcate that conversation or those recommendations. Okay.
Yeah, Will, I was just going to say that we have a big committee here, or a big panel, and I think that's fantastic. And the more we learn, the more I think engaged we can be, because I think there's a tendency, you have a big push, you get the legislation passed, you override the veto, and then everyone's like, oh, cool, we're done. And I think that's absolutely the opposite, that whether it's the community, the legislators, the governor, the chiefs of police and other law enforcement need to know that we're still here and we still want to be better and we want to be more effective. And some of the things that Yetta talked about that we couldn't get, maybe we can get. And as long as we have a presence in our community and they know that we're watching and looking and reaching for a better outcome, I think that's why our meetings are so important. And I'm really hoping we can be, meeting regularly.
Okay. Well, and thank you for that. Thank you for those words. I agree 100%. Are there any other comments that anyone wants to make, or observations before we depart?
Thank you so much, William, for bringing us all back together and for your leadership.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Thank you so much.
It's a collective effort. Thank you. And if that is not all, we will adjourn the meeting and look forward to